A month ago, which now seems more like a year ago, Ipsos released the findings of a poll gauging public opinion on defunding the police. When asked about acting on one interpretation of that controversial phrase, abolishing the police, only 11% of Americans supported doing it. When asked about the other interpretation, redistributing funds typically earmarked for law enforcement to community programs, as Los Angeles has done, a whopping 57% said they'd rather fully fund the cops in their communities. I think about those findings and then I think about what we've seen in the last week. I remind myself that the poll was taken before we knew of Adam Toledo. Before we saw shaky video of a Chicago police officer chasing the 13-year-old down a dark alley. Before the force of the bullets entering his chest slammed his small body back against a fence. Before we saw him lay still. "Show me your hands," Officer Eric Stillman shouts. "Stop. Drop it." Adam stops, tosses what appears to be a gun to the ground and then turns around with his empty hands in the air. Shots ring out. "Get an ambulance over here now," the officer again shouts, this time breathlessly into his radio. "Look at me. Look at me. You all right?" He wasn't. He isn't. The poll also was taken before we knew of Daunte Wright. Before we saw more shaky video of the 20-year-old struggling to get back into his car and away from two officers after being stopped in suburban Minneapolis. A third officer, a 26-year veteran named Kim Potter, enters the fray, yelling, "I'll tase you." She fires and Wright's body goes limp, which is when, or so the story goes, Potter realized she had fired her gun, not her taser. Holy S. I shot him. And the poll was taken before we knew of Karen Nazario. Before we saw even more shaky video of two weirdly aggressive cops from the small town of Windsor, VA, pulling their guns, pepper spraying and finally hitting the second lieutenant in the US Army. What's going on? Nazario asks after being pulled over in his brand new SUV. What's going on is you're fixing to ride the lightning, son, Officer Joe Gutierrez responds. I'd like to think something has changed in the past month. Listen closely, and the remarks from many politicians certainly sound more hollow, at least compared with the gunshots I keep hearing in videos that keep appearing on my social media feeds. Asked about Daunte Wright last week, President Biden told reporters that, "It's really a tragic thing that happened. But I think we've got to wait and see what the investigation shows." The entire investigation. Later on Twitter, he added that, "We know what we need to do to move forward, rebuild trust and ensure accountability so no one is above the law." Meanwhile, House Majority Whip James E. Clyburn, D.S.C., called, as he long has, for restructuring law enforcement. "This is not about policing. This is not about training," he said during an appearance on CNN.